They tied Eleanor Grace to the rotting post of a storage hut at the edge of Drab One just before dusk. Coarse hemp rope scratched raw across her wrists. The knot was so tight it stung with each breath. The townsfolk had spoken, and silence, they decided, was dangerous. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just watched with wide, unreadable eyes as the sun slanted low over the plains, setting the tall grass aflame in hues of gold and dying fire. Someone spat near her feet, another muttered a half-hearted prayer, and then, one by one, they left her there, alone, lashed to wood with a dry wind whispering secrets in her ear. Her dress, once ivory lace, was stained with prairie dust and travel. A wedding dress. She'd worn it for a man whose eyes were as sharp as broken glass and twice as cold. Harland Creek had ordered her from a Boston catalog, paid $20 and a promise of shelter. She arrived with a satchel, a book of psalms, and a voice she rarely used. And in Drab One, Texas, that silence became her crime. Eleanor had never been one for loud declarations. As a child, she'd learned quickly that noise invited notice, and in her aunt's house, notice invited pain. So she learned to move quietly, speak softly, and listen. People underestimated the quiet. They assumed it meant simple-witted, or hiding. They were right about the hiding. At first, Harlan thought her silence was charm, humility, maybe even obedience. But charm curdled in him quickly. Within days of their marriage, his affections had soured into suspicion. He didn't like how she sat at the table, hands folded, eyes lowered, saying nothing. He didn't like how she wandered the property alone, watching birds, collecting herbs, talking to no one. "You're not right," he told her one night, stinking of whiskey. "You're watching like a hawk and speaking like a ghost." She'd said nothing. Just looked at him. And in that silence, he saw something he couldn't control. Rumors started soon after. The preacher's wife said Eleanor gave her the chills. One of the stable boys swore he saw her standing in the field long after dark, talking to herself. Children whispered that she could speak to snakes. Some said she'd been sent by Comanches to spy. Others believed she was a cursed widow who'd killed her last husband and come west for more. No one knew the truth, because Eleanor never offered it. She didn't need to. Truth in Drab One was whatever the loudest voices said it was. So when the council gathered, 4 men and 2 God-fearing women, they agreed she needed time away. Not jail, just isolation. A warning to bring her back to her senses, they said. They bound her wrists and marched her out to the abandoned supply hut by the edge of the plains. The building had once stored grain and dried meat before the rats and mold took it. Now, it leaned like a drunk against the earth, half buried in thorn brush and surrounded by brittle weeds. She watched them walk away without a word. Only the deputy lingered, a boy really, maybe 20, with skin like sun-baked leather and eyes too soft for a badge. "You ain't said nothing this whole time," he said, not unkindly. "You scared, miss?" Eleanor looked at him. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He hesitated, then tipped his hat and left. When the silence returned, it wrapped around her like smoke. Eleanor leaned her head back against the wooden post and stared up at the sky. A few hawks circled overhead, sharp against the fading blue. The sun dropped lower, the wind cooling into a chill that bit through her dress. In Boston, silence was a luxury. In Drab 1, it was a death sentence. She shifted against the ropes, trying to ease the pressure on her arms. Splinters pricked her skin. Flies buzzed. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, its lonely call riding the wind. She thought of the train ride west, all that open land rolling by, the clack of wheels a constant rhythm beneath her feet. She remembered the first time she saw Harland, standing at the station in a black coat, holding a tin badge and a bouquet of wilted flowers. He hadn't smiled, just said, "You the one?" She nodded, and he took her bag. That was all. She thought of the boy in Boston, the one who gave her a pressed violet once and tried to kiss her behind the schoolhouse. He joined the Union Army and died before he could send another letter. She thought of her mother, her voice soft and low like the hymn she used to hum before bed, a voice Eleanor hadn't heard since she was 7. The prairie stretched out before her in all directions, limitless, uncaring, eternal. It was beautiful in a way that hurt. Her throat burned dry from dust and thirst, but still, she didn't cry. She wouldn't give them that. There was something coiled inside her, something old and coiled tight. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hate. It was something quieter, harder. A steel wire strung through her soul. The sun dipped below the horizon. Shadows stretched long and black across the ground. The hut creaked. The wind whispered. Coyotes cried again, closer now. Then, from the dark, a sound. Not wind, not animal. A soft crunch of footsteps in dry grass. Eleanor froze. Her eyes scanned the shadows. Nothing moved. Another step, then silence. She held her breath. A figure appeared, a silhouette against the pale shimmer of starlight, tall, broad-shouldered, still as a tree. The wind shifted, and with it came the faint smell of leather and smoke. He was barefoot. He was watching her. She didn't move. Couldn't. The figure took a step closer. Moonlight caught the edge of his face, angular, sharp, marked by 2 dark streaks of paint or ash. A feather tied into his braid caught the breeze. Her heart thudded. She'd never seen a Comanche before. Not in truth, only stories, bloody, brutal stories spun by terrified men with loud mouths and twitchy fingers. But this man, this warrior, stood without fear, without anger, just watching. Eleanor met his gaze, refusing to look away. Another step. He stopped within 10 feet, close enough that she could see the smooth bone handle of a knife at his belt. He tilted his head, studying her. Then, slowly, he knelt and placed one hand on the earth. He said something in a low voice. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was not cruel. Then he stood and vanished, gone like he'd never been there at all. Iska 3 image prompt leak do. The wind picked up. A tumbleweed rolled past. The hut moaned. Eleanor closed her eyes, her pulse still thundering. She didn't know if he was real or spirit, savior or predator. But she knew one thing with crystal clarity. Someone had seen her. Really seen her. And that changed everything. Out on the prairie, silence still reigned. But in Eleanor Grace's chest, something stirred, ancient, wild, and waiting. The night split open with the scream of a horse and the crack of gunfire. Eleanor jerked awake, hard hammering as shadows danced across the walls of the hut. Outside, men shouted. Hooves thundered. Firelight flickered somewhere beyond the windowless walls, casting long, jumping glows through the slats in the wood. She twisted in her bindings, wrists raw, breath caught in her throat. The door exploded inward. A figure burst through, low, fast, and fierce. Not a shout, not a wasted word, just movement like a storm breaking loose. It was the same man from the night before, the Comanche. Even now, she could see his face more clearly, painted with streaks of black and ochre, his eyes twin flames. He dropped to one knee beside her and drew his knife. The blade sliced the rope in one pull. Her hands fell, numb and trembling. She didn't speak. He didn't wait. He grabbed her arm, and they were moving through the ruins of the door into the chaos. Torches flared in the distance. 3 men on horseback rode hard toward the hut, rifles raised, Harland among them, his voice like gravel ground in a fist. There she is. The warrior didn't look back. He shoved Eleanor forward and sprinted alongside her. Her legs, stiff from being tied, threatened to collapse beneath her, but the urgency in his movement dragged her on. They tore through tall grass, through brambles, through the whispering dark. She stumbled. He caught her. Again. Always forward. A shot cracked close behind them, thudding into the dirt near her feet. Eleanor flinched. The man kept moving, never breaking stride, never losing focus. He was the storm now, wild and uncatchable. They reached a dry creek bed and dropped into it. Breath wheezing, Eleanor fell to her knees. The man crouched beside her, motioning for silence. Not that she had any voice left to give. They waited. Above, riders thundered past, the rattle of hooves fading into the night. Shouts echoed, sharp and angry, until they too disappeared. The warrior remained still, eyes narrowed, listening with the intensity of a hawk. After a moment, he gave a sharp nod and rose. Eleanor didn't move. She was shaking. He looked down at her, then reached into a pouch and handed her a water skin. She drank, coughing. Dust coated her throat. The water was warm, but it tasted like life. She handed it back. He studied her face for a long moment, then said something in a language she didn't understand. His voice was low, gentle, not like Harlan's bark, not like the townsfolk's suspicion. This man wasn't afraid of her silence. He carried his own. She stood on unsteady legs, nodding once, letting her eyes say what her mouth could not. He turned and led the way, his footsteps soft even on stone. They traveled the rest of the night in silence, the Comanche guiding her through gullies and groves Eleanor never would have found on her own. The moon traced their steps across the prairie. Coyotes howled in the far distance. The stars above were unfamiliar, vast and endless, but something in their cold fire steadied her. Just before dawn, they crested a small ridge and looked down into a low, tree-shadowed clearing. Half a dozen hide tents nestled there, nearly invisible among the brush. A faint stream trickled nearby, and smoke rose from a buried fire. Eleanor hesitated. The warrior looked back at her, his face unreadable. He motioned her forward. She followed. The camp was quiet. A few women stirred from their sleep, eyes sharp. Children peeked from behind hides, their expressions weary. No one cried out. No one rushed to greet them. The silence here was thick, but not hostile, more like the hush of watching a wild animal walk into a human place. The warrior spoke briefly to an older woman wrapped in furs. The woman nodded, glancing at Eleanor once before moving toward a tent. A moment later, she returned with a bowl of something warm and a blanket. Eleanor accepted them both with a quiet "thank you." The warrior pointed to a flat stone by the fire. "She Saturday." He sat beside her, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees. Still, he didn't ask questions. Still, she didn't speak. But something shifted between them. In the silence, a kind of understanding. Not peace, but a pause. A space where something new might grow. Later that day, she watched as he taught a young boy how to mend a bowstring. His movements were slow, patient. He was a teacher, a protector, not the monster drab one whispered about. A girl approached Eleanor, offering a woven comb. Eleanor smiled, cautious but grateful. The girl mimed brushing hair and giggled when Eleanor mimicked her. The air warmed with subtle kindness. That night, as the fire crackled low, the warrior finally spoke a name, Tohane. He tapped his chest when he said it. She pointed to herself. "Eleanor." He nodded. "Elano." It was close enough. She tried his name. Tohane. He smiled slightly, just a flicker, but it was the first real smile she'd seen since stepping off the train in Drab One. It lit something small and surprising in her chest. They sat like that as the stars turned overhead. Later, when most of the camp slept, Eleanor asked softly, "Why did you save me?" Her voice rasped from disuse, but the words came. Tohane didn't answer immediately. He tossed a twig into the fire, watched it burn. Then he said, "You looked like someone who had been forgotten." Her throat tightened. Tohane continued slowly, "My sister was taken by men who said they were law." She did not scream either. They feared her silence, too. Eleanor reached out, just slightly, resting her fingers near his on the dirt. Not touching, just near. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. There was nothing else to say, nothing else needed. In the distance, an owl called. The fire hissed. The night exhaled. But peace was a brief visitor. Before dawn, a scout returned on a sweating horse. Tohane met him away from the tents, and the conversation was low, urgent. Eleanor watched from the shadows. Eleanor rose to her feet. Her body ached, her limbs still bruised from the night before. But something inside her was hardening now. Not with anger, with resolve. "I want to help." He studied her, head tilted. "You know how to fight." "No," she said. "But I can learn." He smiled again, barely. But this time, it reached his eyes. "You will." As the camp moved quietly into preparation, Eleanor followed Tohane, watching how he moved, how he read the land. She tied her hair back, shed her torn dress for spare garments gifted by one of the women. She still didn't belong, but she wasn't helpless. Not anymore. By noon, the wind carried the scent of horses. They had a day, maybe less. Tohane handed her a knife. Her hand trembled as she took it, but only for a moment. They will come fast, he said. They think they are strong. They are, she said. He looked at her. But so are you. She had no words for that. Only breath. Only fire. They stood side by side on the ridge, watching the dust rise on the horizon. And Eleanor knew, for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting to be saved. She was standing in the storm, ready. And when it broke, she would not run. The wind changed before the riders arrived. It shifted east, dry and bitter, carrying the smell of men who bathed in sweat and gun oil. Dust billowed like smoke across the plains, a signal in itself. By the time the town posse crested the horizon, the Comanche camp was already quiet as the grave. Eleanor stood beside Tohane, crouched in the tall grass above the ravine. Her fingers were wrapped tightly around the handle of the knife he'd given her, knuckles white. Her heart hammered, but her hands no longer trembled. Her dress was gone, replaced by a buckskin tunic. Her silence, once mistaken for submission, had become something else, readiness. The posse rode in columns of 2 and 3, 30 men strong, with Harland Creek at the front, stiff in his black coat, hat low over his brow. His rifle sat across his saddle like a promise. Eleanor's gut twisted. He looked exactly as he had on the day he'd fetched her from the train station, grim, precise, cruel. Tohane didn't look at her. He was all stillness, eyes on the field below, reading every hoofbeat, every angle. His bow lay across his knees. Painted warriors waited in the trees, flanking both sides of the narrow path. Their faces bore no fear. Below, Harland raised a hand, signaling the others to slow. "We are here to collect what's ours," he called, his voice sharp, practiced. "We don't want blood, just the girl." He meant her. Tohane did not move. Nor did anyone else. The prairie held its breath. "Woman's been kidnapped by savages," Harland continued. "We aim to bring her back. No fight needed, but we'll make one if we have to." Eleanor stepped forward. Tohane's hand shot out, catching her arm. She looked at him. "They'll never believe anything else," she whispered. His jaw clenched, but he let go. She moved to the edge of the hill, just enough to be seen. "I'm here," she shouted, her voice cutting across the field like a blade. "And I wasn't kidnapped." Harland turned sharply. The men behind him shifted, uncertain. "You shut your damn mouth, Eleanor," Harland growled. "You don't know what you're saying. You've been bewitched." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I was tied to a post and left to die." "That wasn't magic, Harland. That was you." He turned red beneath his beard. "You come down here now. That's an order. I'm not your wife anymore." That stopped them. A ripple of confusion passed through the riders. One of the men, young, with nervous eyes, called out, "What's she mean, Harland? You said she'd been taken." "She was," Harland barked. "They filled her head with poison. Look at her." Eleanor raised the knife. "I'm not the one bringing an army to silence a woman who didn't speak." Tohane stood then. Not dramatically, just rose, as natural as a shadow uncoiling. The moment he did, the air cracked with tension. Arrows were ready, drawn back with deadly stillness. Harlan saw it, saw all of it, and something broke inside him. You chose them, he hissed, low and vicious. Over your own people. Eleanor held his gaze. I never belonged to you. And I never will. He didn't shout this time. He just raised his rifle. The shot rang out. Tohane moved before Eleanor could blink, grabbing her and pulling her down as the bullet tore through the air where her head had been. In that heartbeat, everything ignited. Arrows whistled. Rifles cracked. Horses screamed. Battle. Eleanor rolled behind a fallen log, knife clenched tight. Tohane had vanished into the chaos, moving through smoke and shouting like a ghost. Warriors descended from both sides of the ravine, fast and lethal. The posse scattered, caught between panic and pride, their formation breaking like glass. Gunfire split the air. Eleanor crawled low, dirt biting into her palms, and found herself near one of the younger warriors, barely more than a boy, clutching his bleeding leg. Without thinking, she tore a strip of cloth from her tunic and pressed it to the wound. The boy flinched, then saw her and stilled. Hold this, she whispered, placing his hand over the pressure. Something whistled past her ear. She ducked, grabbing a dropped rifle from the ground. It was heavier than she expected, but her grip was firm. Her ears rang. Her breath came fast and shallow. She scanned the smoke for Tohane, for Harlan, for anything familiar. Then she saw him. Harlan, standing atop the ridge, reloading. He hadn't seen her. She didn't think, just ran. The grass parted around her. Bullets tore branches above her head. Somewhere behind her, someone screamed. She charged up the slope, each step a scream of pain through her legs. Harlan turned. Too late. She hit him full force, the rifle swinging up between them. He grunted, falling backward. They rolled, limbs tangling. The rifle clattered away. His fist caught her cheek, hot and bright with pain. She spat blood and slammed the butt of her palm into his throat. He choked. She grabbed the knife from her belt. You saw it. No, he gasped. You ain't. You wouldn't. She froze. Just long enough. His elbow slammed into her ribs and suddenly he was on top of her, his hand around her throat. You think you're something now, he snarled. You think you get to choose. Her vision darkened. Then, light flared. A blur of movement. Tohane. Harlan's head jerked back, blood blooming at the corner of his mouth. The knife fell from his hand. He collapsed. Dead? Tohane knelt beside her, breathing hard. Blood streaked across his arm. Eleanor coughed, clutching her throat. Her eyes burned. I had him, she rasped. Tohane smiled softly, just for a second. I know. The fight below had scattered. Many of the posse had fled, those still alive dragging the wounded away. Some had dropped their weapons entirely. The battle was done. Victory, if it could be called that, lay in smoke and silence. Eleanor sat beside Tohane and watched the prairie burn red beneath the setting sun. Around them, the camp began to gather again. The wounded were tended. The dead mourned. Ash floated through the air like snow. Your people, she said. He nodded slowly. They will have to move again. She looked at him. And you? I will go with them. He was quiet. Or, he added, turning to meet her gaze, you could come too. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the land. Fires were lit. Songs, low and sorrowful, began to hum through the dusk. Tohain reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Smoke still curled from the blackened grass as the Comanche camp packed in silence. Their movements were practiced, solemn. The battle had left its mark: charred soil, wounded limbs, empty bedrolls where friends had once slept. The air was thick with grief, but underneath it ran something else: resolve. Life would go on. It always did. Eleanor stood at the edge of the encampment, staring toward the horizon where Drab One once loomed large in her imagination. That town, that life, corseted, muted, buried beneath expectation, was dead to her now. In its place stood something raw and open. And though her past hadn't quite let go, it no longer owned her. Tohain approached with 2 horses in tow. His posture was steady, but his eyes searched her face carefully, reading her in the quiet way he always had. They will ride north, he said. To safer ground. The mountains. She nodded. What about us? He tilted his head. Where do you want to go? The question struck something deep inside her. Not long ago, no one had asked what she wanted. Not Harland, not the matchmaker, not the world. She had always been a passenger in other people's plans. I want to ride, she said. Until the wind stops. Tohain smiled, small and knowing. Then we ride. They saddled the horses together, working in rhythm. Eleanor's hands, once soft from embroidery and passivity, moved with a new kind of grace, quick, capable. She felt the shift in her bones. The quiet girl in lace and shame was gone. What remained was sharpened by fire and shadow. By midday, they said their farewells. The boy she'd helped in battle touched her wrist gently and placed a small eagle feather in her palm. No words, just the gesture, a gift for someone who had bled alongside them. She tucked it into her braid. Tohain rode ahead and Eleanor followed, her body rising and falling with the horse's rhythm, as if she'd been born to it. The plains rolled out around them, golden, endless, stitched with wind and dust. Every gust whispered memories, but she didn't flinch. She let the wind speak. She let it carry the past behind her like ash. For 3 days they rode through forgotten land, stopping only for fire and sleep. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. In the pauses between wind and hooves, a new language bloomed between them: glances, shared meals, the warmth of firelight across tired faces. On the 4th day, as dusk draped the hills in fire-colored silk, they came upon a narrow canyon carved deep into the earth. Tohain slowed, his shoulders stiffening. What is it? Eleanor asked. He pointed to the stone ridge. Smoke. Eleanor saw it, thin, black, and deliberate. Someone's watching us. Or waiting. They dismounted, leading the horses into a hidden patch of mesquite. Tohain unslung his bow. Eleanor kept her hand near the knife at her hip. They moved together now, silent and low through the brush. The canyon narrowed into a throat of stone, and on the far side, shadows shifted near a fire pit. 3 riders, armed, laughing. One of them leaned forward and fed something into the flames. Tohane tensed. It was a beaded Comanche braid. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Raiders. Not of any tribe. Mercenaries. The kind that preyed on the chaos after skirmishes, stripping what was left of burned camps. Men who hunted not for honor, but for coin and cruelty. Tohane whispered, "They took from us." His voice was barely audible. Beneath it, rage coiled like a snake. Eleanor glanced around. 3 here. Maybe more nearby. Camps like this don't stay small. What do we do? He looked at her. We watch. We wait. But something inside Eleanor was already burning. She had seen these men before. Not their faces, but their kind. Harlaned in different skins. Men who used silence as an excuse to brutalize. She had fled once, as she'd been, tired and voiceless. No more. We can't let them find the others, she said. No, Tohane agreed. That night, under a moon split like bone, they returned. Tohane moved like wind through stone. Eleanor followed, her steps careful, measured. The first guard never heard the arrow whistle before it struck. The second turned at the sound, rifle halfway raised, until Eleanor lunged from the shadows, driving her knife deep under his ribs. The third bolted. Tohane gave chase. Eleanor stood alone now, chest heaving, blood warm on her hands. The second man gurgled behind her, collapsing into the dirt. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. Tohane returned minutes later, panting, blooded, dragging the final man by the collar. The man spat curses in both Spanish and English, his face twisted in fear. He couldn't have been more than 25, no older than Eleanor. Tohane dropped him like refuse at her feet. What do you want to do with him? He asked. Eleanor met the man's eyes. He flinched. Let him live, she said. Tohane's brow furrowed. He'll carry the story, she continued. Let them whisper about the woman who rides with ghosts, who walks with blades and winds and vengeance. Let them fear silence like they once mocked it. Tohane was quiet for a long time, then gave a single nod. Go, he told the man. The raider stumbled backward, then fled, crashing into the dark. Eleanor watched the fire die down. The next morning, they buried the evidence. No markers, no names, just earth and wind reclaiming what blood had stained. As they mounted their horses again, Tohane glanced over. You did not hesitate. She looked ahead toward the rising sun. Neither did you. He smiled. You ride like thunder now. I ride like me. The wind caught her braid and lifted the feather. They rode hard into the dawn, dust trailing behind them like smoke. The land opened before them, wild and endless. Each hill whispered promises of new battles, new beauty, 1,000 unknowns. And Eleanor rode at the front. No longer the bride from the train, no longer the girl tied to a post. She was reborn now in fire and silence and steel. Her story no longer belonged to others. It was hers to shape, to ride into legend, or to vanish into the wind.